Imagine a seed taking root, fueled by generations of passion and purpose. That's the story of Aboitiz Foods. Born from the powerful union of Pilmico and gold coin, more than just a business move, it is a promise of growth and innovation. Pilmico, with its unwavering dedication to quality, provided the foundation. The flour that feeds families and the feed that strengthens livestock. Gold Coin, a pioneer in animal nutrition, added the scientific expertise that unlocks the full potential of every grain and feed ingredient. Welcome to Aboitiz Foods, where tradition meets innovation and legacy meets evolution. Our journey is woven with the stories of over 3,700 partners. A multicultural tapestry united by a common thread: integrity, teamwork, innovation, and responsibility. We are agile, adaptable, and deeply proud of the role we play. Our mission is simple yet profound: to be the heart that sustains Asia's growth. From the first grind of the mill to the nourishing meal on the table. This massive purpose fuels our every action. We are the stewards of a sustainable future. With our vast network, we believe in growing alongside Asia, constantly refining our processes to create a seamless value chain. Expertise and cutting-edge technology are the tools we use to deliver the quality that feeds generations. Our commitment, together we nourish the future, encapsulates the collaborative spirit and shared responsibility that defines our approach to business. We strive to work hand in hand with our stakeholders to build a better, more sustainable future. Guided by these principles, integrating for efficiency. Building expertise for quality. And looking ahead to serve you better. We are not at the beginning of the food chain. We are at its core. We add value at every step because we believe that nourishing people nourishes potential. At Aboitiz Foods, we are more than a company. We are a movement. We're a community of passionate individuals working together to cultivate a brighter future, one nourishing meal at a time. Right now, a woman gets ready to open her business. A farmer checks on his livestock. A baker takes out her first batch. In every part of the world, each day starts anew with their mission of bringing satisfaction and happiness through food. Each bread kneaded with love. Each meal handled with care. This noble undertaking is our passion to provide the best of ingredients and the best of breeds. By being your partner, we have the opportunity to feed the world. We are one food group. The food subsidiary of one of the top conglomerates in the Philippines, Aboitiz Equity Ventures. With over 100 years of advancing business and communities, we occupy a niche in its core businesses by being its integrated food and agribusiness company. Guided by our principles of guidance, consistency, and results, we are dedicated to partnering with our stakeholders to grow and scale their businesses. Above and beyond our quality products, we provide solutions and build partnerships for growth. As one of the industry leaders, we are relentless in our pursuit of excellence by acquiring capacities and capabilities to further expand our footprint across the Asia Pacific. Today, Pilmico and Gold Coin have a strong multinational presence. We have multiple research and production facilities all over the Asia Pacific. We take pride in continuously cultivating an agile and multicultural workforce that is driven by our values of integrity, teamwork, innovation, and responsibility. With these combined strengths, we are equipped to take a leadership position in innovating the food value chain. After a day of labor, everyone deserves a bountiful harvest that will bring happiness in every gathering, in every order, and in every plate we come home to.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Agriconnect Layers. We are thrilled to have you with us for this exciting session, where we will dive into the latest trends and insights shaping the poultry industry. Today's discussions will provide valuable knowledge and strategies to enhance your poultry practices. I am your host, Shadid Sidri, and I will be guiding you through this informative event. Together, we'll explore expert presentations, engage in meaningful discussions, and gain practical takeaways to apply in your operations. But before we begin, please note that this webinar is an exclusive event featuring confidential and proprietary information from Aboitiz Foods through our Pilmico and Gold Coin brands, and our industry experts also. Please ensure that this information is not shared outside the seminar. For a smooth experience, join using the provided link and keep it private. Ensure a strong internet connection, compatible device, and updated software. Test your audio and video settings and keep your camera on to stay engaged. If you have questions or concerns, use the chat box on your meeting link. Our team will be monitoring and addressing your queries. Lastly, we encourage you to stay attentive to the following safety guidelines. Report any safety concerns via the chat box and adhere to local health guidelines. Familiarize yourself with fire exits, inform us of any accessibility needs, and listen to staff instructions. Avoid crowded areas, stay hydrated, take regular breaks, and keep fire exits and equipment clear. Now, to give you a preview of what to expect in this series of informative episodes, please watch this.
Food sustains life. And as innovators in the food and agriculture industry, our role transcends mere planting, harvesting, and farming. It's about nourishing generations and securing sustenance for all. Today, we confront various challenges impacting farm productivity. As global food demand rises, we struggle to match production, hindered by livestock productivity issues. Our solution? Utopia. Maximizing farm efficiency. Produce more with less effort. Let us drive significant change through integration and collaboration. Connect with industry experts, innovators, and more. Innovation fuels the agriculture and livestock industry. Let's come together under one banner at Agriconnect, strengthening the community and reaching your peak performance through livestock expertise. Let us shape a brighter, more resilient future for the agriculture and livestock industry.
Utopia is our vision for optimizing poultry practices, focusing on improving farm efficiency and sustainability. Aboitiz Foods, through our Pilmico and Gold Coin brands, play a key role in this precise nutrition program. Enhanced immunity solutions, and a focus on young animal nutrition. These learnings will help you enhance production efficiency and support the goal of feeding a growing Asia. With the launch of the Agriconnect series, we demonstrate our commitment to advancing the poultry industry through integration and collaboration. Tonight, we begin connecting with industry experts, innovators, and others to work together towards this shared vision. Our first topic focuses on pullet development, a crucial aspect of optimizing poultry practices. To guide us through this topic, we are excited to have Dr. Laura Starr. She is a researcher in poultry nutrition at Scorthorst Feed Research and a lecturer at Aries University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. With a doctorate in animal science from Wageningen University, Laura brings 16 years of experience in poultry nutrition and has been a professor in sustainable poultry farming for 7 years. She is also part of the Poultry Expertise Center in the Netherlands. As we go through the discussion, we encourage you to send in your questions and we'll ensure that they are addressed in the Q&A session. Please welcome Dr. Laura Starr.
Evening, everybody. Hope you can hear me well. As said, I will tell you a bit today about pullet development. Let's see if it works. It's not working.
Yes, hello. Dr. Laura, can you hear me? We cannot hear you on our end. Could you kindly turn on your microphone? So once again, Dr. Laura, if you could kindly unmute your microphone and we could start. you now.
Ah, that's great.
All right.
Good to hear.
So you may proceed with your lecture.
Yeah, and you also see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Ah, great. Okay, sorry for the stress. I don't know exactly when the connection lost, but what I wanted to say is that the rearing period is very important, especially because we keep the laying hens now till, at least in the Netherlands, we keep them till 100 weeks of age. And in this period, these laying hens are able to lay 500 eggs in the total laying cycle. So therefore, the rearing period is really of major importance for a good performing laying hen, so that she can do that for her whole lifespan. So, and the main aim during the rearing period is to reach a mature body weight, and this also includes a good body composition. So a good developed skeleton and a good a ratio between the lean and the fat tissue. So, and we do that by, during the first weeks, we like to stimulate the growth of the small chicks, and that they reach a body weight target of in 5 to 6 weeks of age. And this is the body weight target of the breeder organization. We strive for a high uniformity already from the beginning, so already start right after hatch. And we like to see an excellent lifeability, so very low mortality during the pullet phase. If you look to the rearing period and you look to the performance of the birds, you can distinguish different growth phases. This is shown here in this nice graph, and the first phase is approximately the first 4 weeks, and in this period you see mainly a growth here of the organs. You already see some muscle growth and some skeletal growth. Also the immune system is developed during this period, and then in the next phase you will see a further growth. So here you see that muscle growth, but also growth of the skeleton, so it really becomes a big bird. And in this period, we also should focus on the appetite of the birds. So they have to develop the feed intake. And that's also true for the last phase, the third phase. So this is from about 10 to 17 weeks of age. Also in this period, you have to stimulate the feed intake capacity. And you also see here that birds are still growing, so still muscle growth, still some skeletal growth, but you also see here that the birds start to make a bit of body fat. The start of the reproductive tract starts already before 17 weeks of age, and also the formation of the medullary bone. And the medullary bone is needed for egg production. So as said already 2 slides ago, that uniformity is very important already from the start onwards. And at 17 weeks of age, you like to see that the flock uniformity is high. And this means that you have at least 80% of the body weights that are in a range plus and minus 10% of the average. And that's a bit shown here in this graph. So this is the average, 1230 grams. And if you take minus 10 and plus 10, most of the birds should be between this range of 1100 to 1350 grams. Then if you realize that if you have more than 80% of your birds within this body weight, then you have a good uniformity of your flock. So there are several factors that can affect the uniformity. Of course, stocking density. If you have a too high stocking density, that will affect the uniformity of your flock. Also, if you have not enough feeder space, that will affect your uniformity. The distribution and the height of the feeders and drinkers. If you have a poor uniformity, and you increase the height of your feeders and drinkers, the small birds cannot or have difficulties to eat and drink, and then uniformity becomes even more or less good, let's say it like that. The speed of the feed chain, so if you go too fast then or too slow, let's say it like that, then you can get feed selection by the birds. Feeding technique, it's the accumulation of fine particles, so make a nice homogeneous mesh diet for the birds that they cannot select that much. The feed texture, also related to the feed selection. Of course, you need good feed composition and a high quality diet for the birds. If you're still allowed to do beak treatment, that this should also be done in a good way. In the Netherlands, it's not allowed anymore, so we keep all our birds with an intact beak. You need a good vaccination program, and you have to check the health condition of the flock. So if there are no diseases and parasites that can affect the body weight of the birds and thereby the uniformity of the birds. One thing that's very important for the growth of the birds, but also to stimulate them into egg production, is the lightning program that you use. Here you see some examples that you can use. We often use C with a slightly delayed maturity so that we stimulate them a little bit later into production. And if you look to the lightning program, you need this to stimulate the feed intake of the birds and thereby the growth of the birds. And you can support the early development. It's also a way to control sexual maturation. So what I said, we use the lightning program with a delayed maturity. So we postpone a little bit the sexual maturation of the birds. And then when you like to stimulate egg production, then you have to increase your lightning program, give the birds more light, and then egg production will start. And of course, it's important to control changes in natural daylight. And this is easy in closed houses, but it's more difficult in open houses. So you should be aware of that. Here you just see an example of a vaccination program. This is one program that we used for one of our own flocks. And it's more to show you that those pullets, they really get a lot of different vaccinations. They already get several at the hatchery, and then the rest will given at the rearing farm. So you see here the different vaccinations and also the different methods. And you see here that they get it from hatch till 15 weeks of age. So that's quite a short period in where they get a lot of vaccinations, and these vaccinations will also affect the growth. Often you see a little bit a dip, reduced growth after a vaccination. So you really have to take care of that. Then if you look to the feeding of the birds, we normally give the birds different diets during the rearing period. What you see here is that we give a starter diet from hatch till 4 weeks of age, then a grower diet from 4 to 10 weeks of age, and then a pullet or developer diet from 10 to 16, 17 weeks of age, and then a pre-lay diet. And if you look to the nutrients, then you see that, for instance, metabolizable energy is reduced when the birds become a bit older. So we start with a higher energy level, and then we reduce it in the periods thereafter. Here you see the crude protein level that's also reduced in the rearing periods, and it's a bit increased in the pre-lay period. and that's because the pre-lay period is closer to a layer diet already. And here you see the different digestible amino acids. I strongly advise to, if you formulate your diets, to do that based on the digestible amino acids and not on crude protein levels. And here you see what the recommendation of Hendrik's Genetics is for this. Was, for instance, in deculp white bird. If you look to calcium, then you see that the calcium level is more or less similar during the rearing period. Only here in the pre-lay period, you see that the calcium level is increased, and that's also to already prepare the layers for egg production. Here's also mentioned that it's recommended to provide 50% of the calcium in a granular form with a diameter between 2 and 4 millimeters. So that's really good for the birds. And that in the developer or pullet phase and in the pre-lay, that's also to stimulate the feed intake of the birds, the feed intake capacity of the birds, and to have a well-developed gizzard. Here you see the available phosphorus, so that's reducing a bit during the rearing period. And what I'd like to show you is this recommendation is for pullets kept between 18 and 24 degrees. There are also other schedules for if you keep the birds at a higher temperature. But I choose this one because later on in the presentation, I will show you a bit more on lysine and amino acids, and that's related to the levels that are shown here. So I already said a little bit about the pre-lay period. So this is really at the end of the rearing period, when the birds are changing from a pullet to a laying hen. In this period, you see that the medullary bone is developed, metabolic processes are changed from growth to egg production, but also in first weeks of egg production, the birds are still growing, so they still need nutrients for body weight gain. The development of the medullary bone takes about roughly 10 days. And this 10 days is also, as more a rule of thumb, the pre-lay period. So it's a pretty short period, but you have to take it into account. In this pre-lay diet, in this pre-lay period, we give the birds a diet that is already close to a layer diet, but we have about 2 to 2.5% calcium included instead of the 3.5% in the layer diet. And this pre-lay diet should be applied for approx 10 days. And in this period, you feed about 1 kilogram of pre-lay diet per bird. Here you see a kind of schedule that you can use to change from a developer diet to a pre-lay diet. Then I'd like to tell you a bit about a trial that we have performed. This is with amino acid levels. So these were the levels that I just showed you when we discussed the feed of the birds. This is a trial or a project. It's named Customized Nutrition in Layer Pullets. And what we do in this trial is that we try to determine the amino acid requirements of Balkans brown and a Babcock white pullet during the rearing period. And we expected that a higher amino acid intake would increase the body weight, and that the brown and white birds needed more or less the same amount of amino acids, so they had the same requirement. And what we were looking for is shown in this graph. So we had here the different amino acid levels, and here the response. So what we expect is that at the lower levels that we would see a response in body weight, so lower body weight, and that at a certain moment we would not see any growth anymore related to the amino acid levels. And then we can say from, okay, this is the requirement of the birds. What we did in this trial, so we used the breeder recommendations for digestible lysine and all the other amino acids in ratio. And we used that as the 100% diet. And the other test diets contained 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and 110% of the breeder recommendation. And for this trial, we used a precision feeding system. And this means that one bird can enter a feeding system, and in that feeding system, it can eat for 1.5 minutes, and then it's removed from the system again. But then we know exactly what that bird had eaten, and we can say in that feeding system from, okay, you can get the 60% diet or the 80% diet or the 100% diet. So we had these 3 treatments in one pen, and we had the 70, 90, and 110% diet in another pen. And this is a bit how it looks like. So here you see the precision feeding system, and one bird can enter to have the meal that we want. And in this system, we can measure the body weight, and because we know the body weight, we know the flock uniformity, we can determine the feed intake of the birds, we can determine the feed conversion ratio. We also looked at the body composition of the birds and the feed intake behavior. And I will not show you all because that's really too much for the moment. So I only like to show you something on body weight of the birds. Here you see the body weight of the brown bird at 5 weeks of age. And what you see here is the digestible lysine intake. So the total intake over this 5 weeks period. And here you see the body weight of the birds. And you also see here a nice break point for the body weight. So at these lower levels, these birds had a lower body weight compared to these birds. And if you look to the cumulative digestible lysine intake, it's 6.15. And this is about 75% of the breeder recommendation. So the intake of these birds with reaching this growth was lower than the recommendations of the breeder organization. For the white birds, here you see nicely the white bird, also at 5 weeks of age, you see a similar curve with breaking point here. There's a 5.22 cumulative digestible lysine intake, and this connects to about 67% of the breeder recommendation. So also the white birds needed less amino acids to reach the body weight. Then you see here again the brown bird, but this time at 17 weeks of age. So here again the body weight and the cumulative digestible lysine intake. And then you see that most of the birds have a nice similar body weight. Only at the end there are some birds that are a little bit lower. So you have here the breaking point, and that's around 23.5 grams of lysine intake, and this related to about 52% of the breeder recommendation. So that's much lower than recommended. And here you see the white bird, also at 17 weeks of age, and you also see a breaking point here. And here you see that it's almost 21 gram, and that's related to 41% of the breeder recommendations. Also the white birds in this trial needed less amino acids to realize the body weight. So from this trial, we concluded that the amino acid requirements for the pullets were lower than the breeder guidelines.
Hello, Dr. Laura. We seem to have lost the audio once again.
Okay, oh, great. Okay, then I move on because at the moment we are more or less repeating this treatment, but not with the precision feeding system, but with the floor pens. And we use the 60, 80, and 100% amino acid diets. We just started, but I can already give you a sneak preview in that the 60% birds are really behind in body weight. So the 80 and 100% diet seems to go well, but the 60% diet is really too low. So again, don't try the very low amino acid levels yet. Then it's of interest to see the feed cost when reducing your amino acid levels. This is related to the trial. Here you see the cost of the starter, grower, and developer diets. This is the 100% diet. This one. And if you see here, I took the 80% diet because the 60% diet and 70 are too low. So I will only compare it to the 80% diet. I think that will be a reliable amino acid level that you can have a good, still a good performance. If you then look to the feed intake, the expected feed intake of the birds, so this is the feed intake in the starter diet, the feed intake in the grower diet, and the feed intake in the developer diet, and the feed cost related to the feed intake. So here you see the feed cost at when you use 80% amino acids in the starter and in the 100% diet. So you see here 0.03 euro difference here also and here also. So in total, you can save about 0.10 euro for each bird. So this is about almost a 5% reduction in your feed cost if you reduce your amino acid levels. So that's quite a lot. To end, the intake of nutrients depend on the feed intake. So to have a good nutrient intake, you have to be aware of your feed intake. And if the feed intake is lower or higher than expected, then you have to adapt your feed. It's wise to use a crumble instead of a mesh diet in the starter phase, because this really improves the feed intake of the birds and gives the birds a better start. You have to stimulate the development of the proventriculus and the gizzard, and thereby you can stimulate the feed intake capacity. So you have to give, especially in the grower and the developer phase, a more coarse diet to realize this. Development of the medullary bone is very important before the first ovulation. So you really have to use the pre-lay diet with already a bit higher calcium level, and always supply fresh and clean drinking water to your birds. So that's what I wanted to tell you for this moment. If there are any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laura. Now, our floor is open for your questions. To facilitate our Q&A session, we are pleased to introduce Dr. P. Lian Chang as our moderator. Dr. P. Lian Chang brings a wealth of expertise in poultry nutrition and livestock husbandry. Having earned her undergraduate and master's degrees in animal science from National Chongqing University in Taiwan, and completing her PhD at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom. With 19 years of experience at Gold Coin, Dr. Pilien has held various roles, including Research Farm Manager, Mill Nutritionist, Technical Manager, and Poultry Lead Nutritionist, making her well equipped to guide today's discussion. Please submit your questions through the chat function, and Dr. Pilien will address them accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Pilien Chang.
I appreciate your presentation, Laura. As you mentioned, nowadays, we keep modern broiler longer. So the critical management and nutrition practical become a very crucial during the pullet stage. I will not go through the detail of what you mentioned in your presentation, which we'll share at the end of this session. One I want to highlight is you bring us an opportunity for cost saving by reconsidering the breeder recommendation for pullet diets, which is an important perspective for our audience. Now, I would like to open the floor to any question from the audience. Your thoughts and inquiry are welcome. Any question? Okay. Okay, the first question is, in your presentation that the pullet body weight can be achieved with lower amino acid diet. Will this have any impact on the layer periods?
Thank you for the question. It's a good question. As said, we're still investigating. I already said that the 60 and the 70% diet, so really a strong reduction in amino acids, it will not work. But I think that you can reduce at least a bit till 90 or 80%, and that is mainly because the breeder organizations they strive for a high body weight, a high egg production, and a high egg mass, but not for the economic optimum. And I think if you go a bit lower, you can also reach a good egg production, so a good laying rate and a good egg weight, but your feed cost will reduce a bit, and maybe you have a little bit smaller egg, but economically this will be of more interest to go a bit lower in your amino acid level. Yeah.
Thank you. The second question is, you only mentioned briefly on the lighting program. And our customer in Asia, most are still using natural lighting. So in your recommendation, what is the lighting program when you are following the natural lighting and the light density? What should they choose?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think, to be honest, that it's best to have contact for that with your local breeder organization, because I think if you are if you have a bit higher light intensity in certain periods, or a little bit shorter or longer lighting period, that you already should adapt to that. And I think they can give a better advice on that than I can.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So it's a pointing answer, but I think it's true.
Yeah, thank you. I think here, go back to your first slide, where you mentioned the nowadays modern broiler is keep longer. So during the pullet rearing, where is the key turning point which our customer have to pay attention to ensure the persistency of laying performance. Can you give us some suggestion on the turning point where we should pay more attention to?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a good start really during the first weeks. So really till you reach the body weight of that they have to be at 5 to 6 weeks of age. That's a very critical point. And if you reach that, then it's most likely that you also will reach the target body weight at 17 weeks of age. And of course, it's not that if you reach that 5 to 6 weeks body weight target, that thereafter you don't have to take care of them anymore, that you have to give them a poorer diet. You still have to take good care of these birds so that they will have a good start of lay. It's really the first 5 to 6 weeks are really critical, but also thereafter, take good care of the birds to have a good performing bird later on in life.
Okay, I think we are done with all the questions. So if you have any more, we have one more. Okay.
Good.
Okay. This one is, are there any guideline for the percentage or level of crude protein in feed formulation at each phases and age range?
What I already showed in the presentation is that you have guidelines for the starter, the grower, and the developer phase. So in that sheet there were also mentioned the crude protein levels, but it's even better to look at the digestible amino acid levels. I strongly suggest to use those levels. So don't only look at the crude protein levels, but if you formulate a diet, make use of the digestible amino acid levels that they recommend.
Yeah, thank you very much. And
Thank
I think we will have more detail on the crude protein in the heat stress. And see you in the next Q&A.
Thank you.
Our next topic covers energy intake during peak laying, crucial for maximizing poultry productivity. To guide us, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Roger Davin. Roger is a senior poultry nutrition consultant and product manager at Scorthorst Feed Research. He holds degrees in veterinary medicine, animal science, and animal nutrition from Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. He has completed internships and a postdoc at institutions in the US and Europe. Since joining SFR in 2017, he has been involved in poultry nutrition consultancy across Europe and Asia. As a reminder, feel free to send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll address them during the Q&A session. Please welcome Dr. Roger Davin.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. Sorry for the previous technical issues. Hope that I can go smooth on this presentation. Hope that you enjoyed it. And today I'm going to be discussing on the energy intake during peak laying. First of all, I think it's very important to clarify and to define energy intake. Energy intake measured as kcal intake per bird per day is defined, or it's composed basically by two factors. First of all, we need to measure accurately feed intake. So you need to know what the grams per bird per day are being consumed by your birds at your farm. So that's why it's so critical that there is a good data processing and data analysis in your farm operations. Feed intake is component one. Component two is to understand the energy content of your feeds. And this is usually given as kcal per kilogram or megajoule per kilogram. So next, I would like to first explain the factors that are affecting and are helping understand the complexity to accurately understand the energy content of a complete diet. So we have different ways to express energy. We have gross energy on the top that you can analyze in your lab. However, diets are not formulated on gross energy, but most likely are formulated on metabolizable energy. To obtain metabolizable energy values, we need to conduct digestibility trials that we are surely doing at SFR. And in this step here, we are already subtracting the energy that is being lost via feces and also via urine in the form of uric acid. We are now busy at SFR and in the scientific world to move from the metabolizable energy concept to the net energy concept that will also account for the energy or heat being lost during digestion, metabolism, and activity. So first of all, the main point of this slide is to make sure what energy nutrient you're being used. And here you can find part of these answers. So you see that metabolizable energy equation on how to estimate the energy content of a feedstuff. And I would like to first highlight that in this equation, there are mainly three components. First component is on protein, second component is on fat, and third component is on the NFE, or nitrogen-free extract. So these are the three energy-rich nutrients. Then for each of these three components, you see that there are different parameters. The first parameter I would like to draw your attention are the A, the B, and the C values. And these are basically the energy value of each energy-rich nutrient. But you need to be aware, you should be aware that those values, so the kcal per gram of digestible protein, or the kcal per gram of digestible fat, or the kcal per gram of NFE will be different between different table values. And especially, this is relevant for crude protein and fat. SFR, we have our own specific A, B, and C values. The second component to predict the metabolizable energy values are the digestibility coefficients for each of the energy-rich nutrients. To obtain these values, as I mentioned, you need to conduct digestibility trials. And the question here is, which animal model are you using? What species are you using? Are you using broiler digestibility values also for layers? Or do you have different coefficients for broiler, layers, turkeys, ducks? At SFR, we believe species specific, it's more accurate. And finally, the third most important component to predict metabolizable energy of a raw material are the nutrient contents that are being analyzed in your company. Of course, you could use table values as fixed, and of course, I will strongly recommend to use analyzed values. Is it possible by NIR? But first, you need to make sure that the NIR and wet chemistry analysis are well correlated. And of course, you should be doing that frequently, as frequent, the better. So for each batch, as if possible. So I hope that here you can see already the complexity to obtain accurate energy values for each raw material and for each poultry species. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that to understand the energy intake, we need to understand the energy content of the feedstuffs, and the second component that is very critical is feed intake. And you know, here you have a list here in front of your screens showing the factors, the different factors that can influence feed intake. The first of all is temperature or heat stress. The second component is the breed, the laying breed that you're using, brown versus white. Third component is bird's age. Fourth component is the housing system, cages versus alternative housing systems. Also, the feed composition can play a role on feed intake and also its presentation. And finally, gut health. So for sure, there are other factors that may be influencing feed intake, like what you mentioned earlier on the Q&A about the lightening. But in the next slides, actually, I would like to focus on the first 4 points. The first point, as I mentioned, is temperature. In other words, a lot of times we think that temperature is immediately same as heat stress. But you need to be well aware that heat stress and heat stress index more specifically can be defined by 2 components. One is, of course, temperature, but very importantly, relative humidity. So you see in front of your screens a diagram by Highline in which they colored different temperature and humidity boxes, or these are called different heat stress index. So in green, you see birds are in a comfort zone. So you see temperatures ranging between 20 to 26 degrees, but you see that with 26 degrees at 15% humidity, it's still comfortable. If we go above or beyond this relative humidity, birds will already start getting some signs of heat stress. Or in other words, instead of looking at 15%, if I look at humidity, at the relative humidity that you experience in some of your countries, you will see that at 80–85% humidity, already at 30 degrees, you can have an emergency heat index. So I think this is very critical. Even in your cold season, you can already be achieving this emergency heat stress index. The question is, what will happen then to feed intake? And I will show that in the next couple of slides. Another component, apart from the temperature or the heat stress index, is the component of breed and age. And in this graph here, you can see different ages. So week 20, week 21 to 30, 31 to 40, above 41 weeks of age of 3 different breeds. So we plotted here the feed intake of decal white, LSL classic, and Lohmann Brown classic. And we used decal white feed intake as a reference, so as the 100%. But actually the point I wanted to mention here is that brown hens have a higher feed intake compared to white hens. And this is the same, or this effect, or the fact that the brown hens have a higher feed intake is also translated in all age phases. However, the magnitude seems to be different. At the beginning of lay, feed intake is usually higher in brown hens, but then the values become closer with each other. If we look at the other bar, at the orange bar, you can see that for LSL, in one of our trials, we observed also a substantial lower feed intake compared to decal white. And with this graph, I would like to emphasize the importance that you have at the practical level to accurately measure the feed intake of your birds in your situation at different time points. If I look at the next factor, next component that may be explaining differences on feed intake, this will be housing type. In this graph here, on the x-axis, I plotted the age in weeks. In the left axis, I plotted the feed intake in grams per hen per day. So these are the columns that you observe here. And on the right axis, you can see the percentage difference between different housing systems. If we look at the feed intake values, you will see that at the pre-lay phase and at the beginning of lay, there are not much difference between cage and alternative housing systems. However, if we look at week 25 onwards, this difference remains quite substantial. And if we look at the percentage difference, we see that the difference becomes wider as the bird ages, and it reaches a maximum of 8%. So I explain you the two main factors that can drive energy intake, the first one was to accurately measure the energy content of your feedstuffs and your complete feed, and the second component on feed intake. So once we have defined the energy intake, our ultimate goal for all nutritionists, for all producers, should be to match this energy intake with the actual energy requirement of your birds. If the energy intake is lower than expected, that will most likely bring underperformance of your birds. This probably is less commonly seen. The problem that is most seen in practice will be to have a higher energy intake, so above the energy requirements, which consequently drive to extra costs, but also very importantly on health. And here specifically on the health concept, I specifically want to point out on this picture here on the livers. You see that liver coloring when there is too high energy intake, especially coming from starch. You see that there may be some fattening, some liver fattening liver. This will, of course, affect our production at this right moment, but also the topic you discussed in the Q&A on the persistency of the laying hen production. So maybe a second point of attention, if you want to improve, if you want to increase your laying persistency, you need to look at aspects such as liver health. Energy intake, it's not only important for the energy requirements that the birds have, but also the requirements of other nutrients like amino acids, minerals. It's very important that the energy content of your diets is well balanced with other nutrients when considering the intake of feed of these birds. And this is also why it's so, that's the reason why it's so critical that the feed intake of your flock is well monitored. And as additional point, I also mentioned that the challenge is to have a great balance of intake and energy requirements, especially at the start of lay until peak. So that will be on between 21 to 32 weeks of age. Find energy intake, and we said how relevant it is to match it with the requirements. And now the question is, how can we estimate the energy requirements of your birds? And here you see again, okay, Roger, why are you putting another complex equation? But actually, I would like to simplify it by saying that energy requirements can be measured basically by three components. One component with a W here is knowing what is the actual body weight of your birds. By multiplying with 0.75, we will calculate the metabolic weight. A second component, apart from your maintenance due to the body weight, here will be the weight gain that is happening at different rates depending on the breed and depending on the age of the hens. And finally, the third component we need to estimate is the energy that is being used for egg production. And this is measured by having a good assessment of your egg mass production. So now I would like to break down these three different components. For the first component on energy requirements due to maintenance, as I said, it's very critical to monitor your body weight. And here in the table below, you can see values we obtain in Lohmann Brown and LSL Classic birds at week 30 and at week 60. Of course, there is an age effect. So the older the hen, the higher the body weight. But of course, there is a huge, even bigger difference due to breed. So it's important to monitor this body weight to be considered in this equation. Then this value is multiplied by a factor that we consider of 113 kcals per kilogram of body weight. And this is of relevance when calculating the requirements of caged house hens. And now, looking back at the comment I made at the beginning of my presentation about heat stress, I told you that we usually utilize a fixed energy value in relation to the metabolic weight of the hen. However, this factor will change depending on the temperature at the barn. And so most relevant for your wall area, I will say that when you achieve temperatures above 20 degrees Celsius, per each degree that you're above 21, the maintenance requirements are reduced by 2.6 kcals per gram. If we put it in other words, or as giving just an example, you saw the previous slide with the different body weights of the hens at week 30, 60 by brown or white hens. When we consider two different conditions at either 20 or 30 degrees, you see that this 10 degrees difference is going to be giving 26 kcals less of requirement per hen. So this is, of course, a lot of precision, but this is also the way to prevent liver health and other abdominal fat accumulation, but also economically, it will make sense to make these adjustments. The second fraction explaining the energy requirements of laying hen per day are determined by weight gain, and as I said, it's critical to monitor the weight gain of your birds. But the third component that can also be more variable, and that is also very critical to monitor, is the energy requirements of egg mass. And egg mass, you need to know, it's not just laying rate, it's not only egg weight, is considering both factors. So you need to accurately monitor your laying rate percentage. You need to accurately monitor your egg weight to calculate your egg mass. So you see here, for instance, in the Lohmann Brown, we had a higher laying rate, about 95% at week 30. This was quite reduced on week 60, down to 88%. However, due to the higher egg weight, the egg mass is not so different. So here you see that in this case, the energy requirements coming from egg mass are quite similar. However, if we look at if we do the same calculation for the LSL white, you see that the difference is a little bit wider, about 4 kcal per hen per day. Of course, if you multiply days by weeks, by months, that's also a lot of extra energy that the hen may be getting. So, to finalize my presentation, I would like to give you some take-home messages. First of all, energy is the most expensive nutrient in poultry diets. I tried to show you how to estimate energy intake, and it should be accurately measured by monitoring the energy content in raw materials and complete diets, and also closely monitoring feed intake of your birds. A third point that it's important to consider is the energy system being used, that should be consistent and should be in agreement between the energy valorization of your feedstocks and feed and the energy requirements of your broilers. And we believe at SFR we have both. And fourth point of take-home message, I would say that feed intake is influenced by several factors, and I try to explain you some of them by showing examples on the effect of temperature, the effect of breed, housing system, and age. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roger. Now, our floor is open for your questions. We would like to invite Dr. Pilian Chang back to moderate the Q&A session. Please submit your questions through the chat function, and Dr. Pilian will address them accordingly. Let's welcome back Dr. Pilian Chang.
Thank you, Roger, for your informative talk. I hope we still keep our audience after this mathematic heavily talk. However, management energy intake is crucial. It's not only directly influence egg production and overall flock performance, it's also your money. As Roger mentioned, it's most expensive nutrient. However, this challenge arises when the feed intake decreases during the picking period due to many factors that Roger had mentioned in his presentation. One significant factor we will explore further is heat stress, which will be addressed by our next speaker. Before we move on, are there any questions for Roger? Okay, Roger, what solutions do you recommend for addressing low feed intake during the picking phase?
Thanks for the question, Pilin, and I hope that my presentation could also be understood by the general public. Otherwise, I will be happy to further explain any details at another moment. Yeah. Answering your question, Pilin, I think one of the components that will stimulate feed intake in laying hens is the energy content that needs to be correctly assessed. But also another factor related to energy is the source of energy that you are using. So I believe that if you consider starch or fat as energy sources, I think that fat will help stimulate feed intake. But moreover, I think it could help also preventing having many fatty liver issues. So I will consider energy source as one of these factors to manage. Of course, it's always very easy to point at feed or a diet, but I will say there is much more components that can be also monitored or addressed at the farm level.
Okay, thank you. I think the next question is very common from our customer, that because you are covering the feed nutrient during the picking. So the question often we receive is, what can we do to accelerate the egg size faster by nutrient perspective? What can we do?
Thanks, Pilin. I think that's a very good question. I also get this type of questions in Europe because I understand producers really want to achieve the biggest egg possible as soon as possible. I can totally understand this is a goal that is set by many producers. However, if we are switching a little bit the paradigm and considering the point that Laura was making, having a good pullet to achieve extended production periods, I think it's important that the bird has its own time to build up a good skeleton, and also that will help be more persistent, to be more sustainable over time, and at the end of the period achieve the desired not only egg weight but especially egg mass. Of course, that depends on the contracts you may have with egg companies, but in Europe, especially in the Netherlands, egg mass is of critical interest, and that's why we think the pullet phase is really critical. And then having a slower start, not pushing immediately the bird too harsh, is key in order to achieve good persistency during a longer period of time.
Thank you. I think to summarize what Roger's answer is not only starting looking at day-in period diet, you still have to look back to Laura's presentation, how to achieve the body weight during the pullet times. Okay. Okay, we have another question. Actually, it's more Laura's question. Please share the best lighting program from day-old chick until pullet.
The slide from Laura's presentation, you mean?
I think it's the lighting program from day-old chick until pullet. I think this, yeah. Maybe we will answer it later on, yeah. And then,
This one?
yeah. So the other question is how to maintain large egg size in hot weather conditions. How
So
can,
to clarify that question is how to maintain high egg weight
yeah.
connected, but I don't understand the connection with the lightning program that you
No,
were
not
mentioning.
the lightning. The lightning, I think that question flow in here is more for Laura. So we will pass to Laura for that
You will.
question. Yeah. But
Got
then
it.
the following question is how to maintain the egg size, the large egg size during hot weather conditions. Are there a way we can maintaining this egg size?
In heat stress conditions, how to maintain egg weight.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I will think that it will, one of the main drivers will be amino acid intake. So the point that I made on one of my slides to balance energy with nutrient intake, it's very critical. So if you're going to have a lower energy intake due to the lower feed intake, you should compensate maybe with a higher energy content in the diet, but not too much. But it's also important to balance with other nutrients like amino acids or minerals that may be also explaining egg size.
Okay, thank you very much, Roger. I will
You're
see.
welcome.
Yeah, I will see you in the next Q&A.
Great. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Our final topic addresses heat stress management in laying hens, a vital aspect of ensuring optimal poultry health and productivity. We'll explore effective strategies to manage and mitigate heat stress. To guide us, we are delighted to introduce Dr. Ellen van Eerden. Ellen is a researcher in poultry nutrition at Scorthorst Feed Research, Netherlands. She completed her studies in animal sciences at Wageningen University and pursued a PhD on energy metabolism and immunology in young pullets. After her PhD, Ellen worked as a postdoc at Utrecht University before joining Scorthorst Feed Research in 2009. She focused on the link between nutrition and intestinal health. Please remember that you are welcome to submit your questions at any point during the presentation. We'll address them during the Q&A session. Please welcome Dr. Ellen van Eerden. Dr. Ellen, can you hear us? We're not able to hear your audio. Oh, yes, we can hear you now. Could you try speaking, please?
Okay, I will try again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, Doctor.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. I was just explaining that I will build my presentation on the presentations from my colleagues Laura and Roger. When we deal with heat stress, the general impact on the laying hens is that we see a decreased performance, for example, a decrease in feed intake or a decrease in egg production. In severe cases, even an increased mortality. and also a decreased reproduction. So this impact can increase now that we are facing global warming issues, but it's also because of genetic process in the laying hens. For example, a faster growth in broilers is also associated with an higher impact of heat production, and also any external factors will further implicate heat stress. This picture shows a somewhat extended version of the presentation by Roger. It shows that the gross energy is converted into metabolizable energy, while at the same time you lose energy in the form of feces and urine. Metabolizable energy, in turn, is converted into metabolizable energy for maintenance, which is fully converted to heat production. But also part of metabolizable energy is diverted to metabolizable energy for production. But due to certain inefficiencies in the conversion to net energy for body weight gain, part of this energy for metabolizable energy for production is also converted into heat. And the same is true for net energy for egg production. This is a somewhat similar picture presented earlier by Dr. Laura. It shows that the genetic progress over the past 40 years in brown and white breed laying hens. Not only do birds reach a higher egg production at a younger age, nowadays we also see that laying hens are kept for a prolonged period of time. So nowadays it's no longer an exception when birds reach a laying period to 100 weeks of age. This heat stress index was already well explained by Dr. Roger, so I will just focus on the take-home message for you. Please remember, heat stress is not only a matter of temperature, it's also a matter of relative humidity. The combination of the two determines if a bird experiences heat stress or not. So what do we see when birds experience heat stress? First of all, when they are no longer able to evaporate heat, they have to switch to another way of getting rid of heat. This is through an increase of the respiratory rate. So the birds start panting with their beaks open. They also spread their wings in an attempt to lose more heat. But due to the high respiratory rate, the birds lose a lot of CO2. And this leads to a respiratory alkalosis. A respiratory alkalosis means that there's an increase in blood pH. At the same time, there's also an increased excretion of bicarbonate through the kidneys. And it's important to realize that in order to get rid of an excess of bicarbonate, the bird also loses, for example, sodium and potassium. And finally, stress also causes a leaky gut, which also leads to an extra loss of water, bicarbonate, and certain minerals. During heat stress conditions, it's clearly shown from this table that critical minerals such as sodium, potassium, but also calcium and phosphorus are excreted almost twice as much compared to birds under thermoneutral conditions. You can, you can imagine that if there is more calcium excreted, that there is less calcium available for eggshell formation. So this can lead to an impaired eggshell quality when birds are under heat stress. If the heat stress continues, then eventually bone disorders can appear because more calcium has to be mobilized from the bones. And due to the loss of sodium and potassium, you generally need a higher electrolyte balance in your diet when birds are under heat stress. The heat stress cascade looks like this. First, there's heat stress. Heat stress can lead to reduced feed intake. But heat stress also leads to a leaky gut, meaning that birds lose valuable nutrients. Also, a reduced feed intake has a direct impact on the condition of the gut. So the gut is also at risk. At the same time, there's an activation of the immune system. This leads to an increased nutrient requirement. But we've just seen that feed intake is reduced. So here is a conflict. So let's focus on the first three parts. The bird. But that means that the blood flow towards the intestines is decreased. This leads to a local hypoxia. So a local hypoxia, a low oxygen level at the intestinal level. And this leads to an impaired intestinal integrity. You can see on the picture on the right-hand side, in this panel, you can see two adjacent enterocytes. They are kept together through these protein complexes called tight junctions. In the panel on the right-hand side, you see the same two intestinal cells again, but now you can see that the tight junctions are damaged, which means that the gut becomes leaky, and any potentially dangerous material can directly be absorbed from the intestines towards the bloodstream. And this can induce pro-inflammatory responses. So what about nutrition during heat stress? Roger already mentioned the important energy delivering components such as fats, carbohydrates, but also proteins are required, not necessarily for energy, but mainly for building tissues and building eggs. Under heat stress conditions, I've just shown that birds lose a lot of sodium and potassium. Therefore, minerals are also of critical importance when you are dealing with heat stress conditions. And it may seem like an open door, but also water is very important. And I will focus on these components. Dr. Roger just told us that the energy requirement may decrease when the temperature rises above 21 degrees. And he showed a calculation example for how much you can decrease your energy level when the temperature rises above 20 degrees. And this is because there is a reduced energy requirement for maintenance. However, if the temperature increases above 27 degrees, we see that the energy requirement increases, and this is because there's more energy needed for panting and heat loss, because panting requires a lot of energy. Therefore, in order to maintain feed intake, the general advice is to use a high-density diet under heat stress conditions. But you have to be careful, because if the energy level in the diet is too high, it can lead to a further decrease in feed intake. So even a lower feed intake, but also an associated lower fat digestibility. But this depends on the fat source that you are using. So in general, our advice is to use highly digestible lipid sources under heat stress conditions. There's another note. If the heat stress continues for a prolonged period of time, it can be useful to reduce energy level, but be careful not to decrease the amino acid level too. So you have to make sure that the level of digestible amino acids is still on the right level in order to maintain a proper egg production, egg mass production. So we were now talking about nutrients, and it's important for you to know that different nutrients have a different heat increment of feeding. The heat increment of feeding is the heat that is produced when energy is when metabolizable energy is converted into net energy. This goes along with a certain inefficiency, and this inefficiency is converted into heat. But the heat increment of feeding is not the same for all nutrients. As you can see from this table, the heat increment of feeding for protein is much higher than for starch or fat. This gives you an indication in which direction to go if you formulate a diet for birds under heat stress conditions. So fats and carbohydrates are sources of energy, but the heat increment of feeding for fat is much lower than for carbohydrates. Therefore, it's recommended to use lipid sources over carbohydrate sources under heat stress conditions. But you have to be aware, if the fat level is too high, it has a negative effect on pellet quality in case you are feeding a pelleted diet to laying hens. So in that case, it might be worthwhile to consider using a vacuum coater to spray lipid on the pellet instead of putting it in a mixer. And you also have to be careful that certain fat sources with many polyunsaturated fatty acids are more susceptible to oxidation. If you are feeding MASH diets, there can be an additional benefit if you use a somewhat higher fat inclusion in the diet, because it can bind fine particles, and this has a positive effect on feed intake. We've seen from the table that the heat increment of feeding for protein is relatively high. And this is especially the case when protein is used as an energy source. And in heat stress conditions, there's also a lower protein efficiency and a lower protein retention because of the negative effects on gut integrity. And this can lead to a reduced growth rate. So our general advice is to reduce the crude protein level, for example, by 1 to 1.5% under heat stress conditions. By doing this, you will minimize the energy cost of excreting a surplus of nitrogen, and it will be easier to formulate a diet if you have access to feed-grade synthetic amino acids. Under those circumstances, it's easier to formulate a diet while maintaining digestible amino acids and still reducing crude protein. But then we come to a very important topic, and that is if you check out a feedstuff table or recommendations, there you will see all kinds of data, but those data were obtained from hens under thermoneutral conditions, not under heat stress. So this raises the question, if, for example, under heat stress conditions, the requirements are slightly different. So also the requirements for a certain amino acid can be different. And as an example, I would like to show you the effects of an increased threonine level when birds were challenged with necrotic enteritis. Unfortunately, the superscripts are a bit shifted in the graph, but you can see here that under non-challenged conditions, here's the table. Under non-challenged conditions, treatment 1 and 2, you can see no difference in body weight gain regardless of the threonine level. So even a high threonine level did not result in higher performance, in higher body weight gain. However, under challenging conditions, when the birds were infected with necrotic enteritis, you saw a clear difference, a clear improvement of body weight gain when the birds were fed a diet with an increased level of threonine. So this indicates that the requirements for certain amino acids can be different under heat stress conditions. But unfortunately, there are no tables available that were developed specifically for hens under heat stress conditions. So what about the mineral sources? We've seen that especially sodium and potassium are excreted under heat stress conditions. And this trial shows what happens if you increase the electrolyte balance from 186 in the starter to 250, or from 174 in the finisher also to 250. This experiment used 3 different sodium sources over here and 3 different potassium sources. And what they found for the sodium sources was that regardless of the sodium source, all of them improved body weight gain, feed intake, FCR, and they significantly decreased mortality. Just for water to feed ratio, there were slight differences between the sodium sources, with the sodium bicarbonate leading to the highest water to feed ratio. Considering the fact that feed intake was practically similar, you can conclude that water intake was highest when the diets were supplemented with sodium bicarbonate. But what about the potassium diets? This is quite interesting because only the potassium bicarbonate showed significant improvements compared to the control, while the other 2 potassium sources were intermediate. So this experiment clearly showed a better performance of the potassium bicarbonate, compared to the other 2 potassium sources. So what can we conclude? First, when you increase sodium and/or potassium in the diet, it will reduce the negative effects of heat stress because you increase electrolyte balance and you increase water intake. And it seems that sodium is more effective than potassium. Within the sodium sources, sodium bicarbonate was more effective in improving body weight. Because this is also important because when the birds pant, they lose a lot of CO2 and they also lose bicarbonate through the kidneys. So by supplementing more bicarbonate into the diet, you can reduce the negative effects of these physiological conditions. So our recommendation is to increase dietary electrolyte balance to approximately 225 to 250 milliequivalents per kilogram. Dr. Roger made a few example calculations to see what happens with if you change the amino acid level and the crude protein level and the DEB. This can be considered a diet without any further constrictions. He just put crude protein at a fixed level of 175 grams per kilogram. So there were no further constraints. You can see in this example that digestible lysine was 6.86. So what happens if you do not fix crude protein, but if you fix digestible lysine? Because that's our recommendation. It was shown by Dr. Laura, it was shown by Dr. Roger. Our recommendation is to use digestible amino acids. So what happens? If you fix digestible lysine, then you will see a decrease in crude protein. But at the same time, he did not put any constraints on DEB. So DEB is still quite low. You can also see that the second diet is cheaper than the control diet, which was fixed on crude protein. But then there was a third diet where he put another constraint. He just fixed SID lysine, again at 6.79. But in this case, he also put a constraint on DEB. He slightly increased DEB to 200 milliequivalents. So what you see now is that in your feed formulation, there will be sodium bicarbonate. It makes no sense to increase sodium chloride, salt, because the sodium that you apply for your DEB is subtracted by the chloride. So if you want to obtain a higher DEB, it's recommended to let some bicarbonate into your formulation. And then almost the final slide, and perhaps almost forgotten, water is sometimes underestimated in terms of importance as a nutrient, because it's the most important nutrient. And while under normal conditions the water to feed ratio is approximately 2, it can increase to 4 in broilers or even to 8 in laying hens under heat stress conditions. So the bottom line is water should always be available ad libitum, preferably cool. The ideal temperature is below 20. The objective is even to maintain below 25 degrees. And it should be fresh. And another thing which you could take into account is that if you need a supplementation on a short term, quickly, you could consider using minerals and vitamin C in drinking water. So in summary, under heat stress conditions, we recommend to increase the energy level by 5% if the temperature goes above 27 degrees. And it's preferred to use fat sources over carbohydrate sources. It's also recommended to reduce crude protein by 1 to 1.5 percentage points. And as we all recommend to use digestible, to formulate a diet on digestible amino acids, it's preferred to use feed-grade amino acids if you have access to those. Also, it's recommended to increase electrolyte balance to 250 milliequivalents per kilogram. And you can use salt, regular salt, potassium chloride, but also potassium bicarbonate to supply extra electrolytes. And last but not least, cool, fresh, ad libitum drinking water. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and this completes my presentation, and I'm open for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellen. Now, our floor is open for your questions. We'd like to invite back on stage Dr. Bilian Chang to moderate the last Q&A session. Please submit your questions through the chat function, and Dr. Bilian will address them accordingly. Let's have once more Dr. Bilian Chang.
Thank you, Ellen, for your engaging presentation. Whether the audience noticed that in this session we didn't mention much about management. We are focusing on the strategy to overcome heat stress through nutrition perspective. So Ellen recommend that you increase the energy level by using fats as an energy source instead of carbohydrate. In a post-long heat stress, you can also lower your energy, but be careful of your amino acid level.
Exactly.
So all these formulation changes are not necessary to increase your formula cost. If you formulate it by using digestible amino acid and balance them with synthetic amino acid. At the last slides, don't forget your water. Provide a Lipton fresh, cool drinking water to support the hydration and overall frog health. Without further ado, are there any questions for Ellen? Okay, so the question one is, how to manage particle and nutrient requirement change as modern layer breed achieve higher production level at younger age?
Is this specifically referring to heat stress, or is it more in general?
In general, I believe.
I think, of course, Laura is the expert. I will try to answer the question just a little, but she can jump in if necessary. While the genetic progress is going on by the breeding companies, they also adjust their recommendations. The thing is, and this was nicely shown by Laura, is that if you go to a precision feeding system, you will see that the birds in general have a lower requirement than the breeding companies recommend. So it's always a matter of where is your focus. The breeding companies focus on maximum production, while we as nutritionists focus more on optimal production under least cost circumstances. So it depends on which table you're using and which recommendations you're using. It's, by the way, always recommended to use the same system. So it's not recommended to use the nutritional recommendations from one table and using feeding values from other tables. That's a no-go. So as long as you stick within a certain feeding system, then you're good to go, but it also depends on the ultimate goal. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think is the way we can do. But before this question, you mentioned, is this question for the heat stress? Are there different way of feeding feed form for the heat stress?
You mean feed form or feed formulation?
Feed form, because in your presentation we discuss more on the formulation, but how about feed form?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Because if you feed a mash diet, birds tend to spend more time eating. So with a pelleted diet, it's more easy for a bird to get the exact right amount of nutrients within the pellet. But making pellets is also an energetically costly process. So also in that case, it's a matter of finding an optimum. In our circumstances in the Netherlands, laying hens are usually fed a mash diet. I'm not sure if it's different within the regions of your audience. So at least I think my impression was that it had to do with the discussion whether to feed a mash or pelleted diet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for the answer. So the next question is, what is the most optimal supplementation to counter heat stress in production phase of the layer chicken?
I think DEB is one of the most important and also one of the easiest to achieve. What I didn't mention specifically was that there are also certain feed additives available. It's difficult for us to comment on certain feed or water additives to decrease heat stress, but for example, vitamin C is known for its positive effects under heat stress conditions, and vitamin C can also be easily added to drinking water. So it's not always necessary to change the feed formulation. Sometimes it's also possible to use certain strategies focusing more on drinking water. And I think vitamin C can be one of them.
Thank you. And I think this question back to your presentation where you mentioned to use the more digestible fat energy source. So the question is there difference between raw material fat and added liquid fat in terms of energy?
So you mean that if there is a difference in fat source between raw materials and, for example, soybean oil or palm oil?
Yeah, the question is more related that some raw material, for example, full-fat soybean meal, you already have fat inside from the full-fat soybean meal, but then you will also add the fat. It can be soya oil, it can be palm oil, it can be lard, everything. So in that way, are there different energy from all these different sources?
I suppose it depends on your matrix. It's definitely true that there is already some oil in full-fat soybeans. And by the way, that's generally high quality oil. So that's already, I would say, a plus compared to lower quality lipid sources. But when you formulate your diet and if you put a constriction on fat or put a minimum of fat in it, you should be able to make a balance between the inclusion of full-fat soybeans and the inclusion of other fats that are added separately.
Okay. We will take the last question. You mentioned that during heat stress, we should implement high density and high digestible diets in an open site convention layer farm in tropical country. Would this approach still be applicable?
When you mean open barn?
Yes,
is that what you
the
mean?
open sided one, yes.
I think it also depends on the air velocity, which you can let go through the flock, because birds also lose heat through, for example, conduction, convection, etc. So the higher air velocity will also help. I'm not sure if that's always the case in your conditions. In general, the rule is that if birds start decreasing feed intake, which is a natural physiological response, but we want to maintain performance. So by doing that, we have to make a careful balance because birds eat less, but you still want them to have sufficient energy, but also amino acids. Therefore, it's recommended to make a more dense diet. But be careful not to
overdone.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you to our speakers for joining us for today's Agriconnect Layers events. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
As we conclude this session, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the valuable insights we have gained from today's speakers. Each speaker offers a unique perspective that have enriched our understanding of layer nutrition across different stages and challenges. From Laura, the nutrition essential for pullet development, she emphasized two key points. Achieving optimal body weight by 5 to 6 weeks, because at this stage, it is an indicator of flock performance. After this, our focus shifts to maintain uniformity within the flock. It's possible to lower amino acid level from the breeder recommendation, which can significantly reduce your feed cost. Roger emphasized the importance of optimal energy intake. He highlights several key factors. And negative energy balance during picking period have a negative effect on egg production and overall flock performance. A pre-lay diet is crucial for developing medullary bones and preparing birds for egg production. There are many factors influence feed intake, which include age, housing type, breeder type, environmental temperature, and heat stress. Building on this, Ellen presents a nutrient-based approach to mitigate heat stress, which open new avenue for formulation. She recommends using highly digestible ingredients to enhance the diet density. Formulation based on digestible amino acid level to lower crude protein, which indirectly lower your heat increasement. Supplement with the electrolyte, such as sodium bicarbonate and potassium bicarbonate, which will improve your performance. Last but not the least, provide a Lipton fresh water in So all this increasing diet density does not necessarily mean higher formula costs. We encourage you to seek out the guidance from Pumigo and GoCoin, your nutrition partners. Thank you all for your engagement and participation. Let's keep the conversation going. See you at the next event.
Thank you, Dr. Pilien. For those who want to revisit today's presentations, the recorded sessions will be available soon on our website. Please visit agriconnectseries.com to access the recordings and explore more resources. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. Please take a moment to complete our survey by scanning the QR code on screen. Your input helps us improve future events. Thank you again for participating. This has been Shadid Sidri. We look forward to seeing you at our future events.